Her new boss is 20 years younger and full of buzzwords and energy and ideas that she's heard dozens of times before that frankly don't work. And Susan feels it, that quiet, unspoken age bias that no one admits out loud. Her reviews are still great, but she knows someone else could decide when she's done. She's respected, experienced, and tired. After 40 years in the same industry, she's starting to think maybe it's time to make a change. The problem? She's not sure she can do it. She's 61, single, and asking the same questions millions of Americans ask every single day. Can I retire now, or will I be making a big mistake? Let's dig deeper into her situation. She's done a lot of really good things. Her condo is paid off. She's debt-free. She's really been a disciplined saver most of her life. She's got $520,000 in her 401k, $65K in a Roth IRA, and $70,000 in a brokerage account, which is about $655 total. She'll have a small pension cost of living that starts next year at $1,100 a month. And if she waits until 67 for Social Security, her benefit will be about $2,750 a month. On paper, it really doesn't look bad, but she knows those numbers have to last a long time. She's a few years from Social Security and 4 years from Medicare, which means several years of bridging her income entirely from savings. And that's what really stresses people like Susan out, and people like me who help Susan. We know private health insurance could run close to $1,000 a month, and her usual spending, things like groceries, utilities, travel, and a little help for her kids adds up to about $4,800 per month. She's run the math 100 times. Technically, she feels she could retire now, but something in her gut says not so fast. There's a lot that's actually keeping Susan up at night. She's thinking, what if I retire and the market crashes right away? I mean, that's a big thing. So we're going to stress test her future against that kind of premise. Or what if her money doesn't last 30 years or some number like that? She does have longevity in her family. And can she actually spend more? Can she enjoy more? Can she spend more when she's younger and healthier without running out of money? And this is a big one. What if my company decides I'm retired before I do? Here's a reality check. Early retirement happens more than people think, a lot more. It's a funny thing about that last question, what's rolling around in her head. What if my company decides I'm done before I do? It's not just paranoia. It happens a lot more than you think. According to the Employee Benefit Research Institute, nearly 6 in 10 retirees left work earlier than they expected, and very few planned it that way. I see this all the time. Some retire because of health issues, layoffs, reorganizations, or subtle pressure to step aside. That's what she's feeling. And an AARP study found that 22% of workers over 60 say they feel pushed out of their jobs or felt pushed out of their jobs because of this age bias. So when Susan worries that her company might make the decision for her, she's really not wrong. It's a reality for a lot of people in their early 60s. And I think this is really important to hear this point. We're not spreadsheets, we're people. Life isn't some kind of break-even calculation. It's a mix of timing, emotion, comfort, and uncertainty. And for Susan, like so many others standing on the edge of retirement, the hardest part isn't doing the math, it's really trusting the math. So here's what I'm going to look at in her plan. First, I want to think about her income gap, what she wants to spend versus what's coming in from her pension and eventually her Social Security. So this income gap, bridging this income gap is actually a big deal, because if she elects to take Social Security at 67, and I'm not sure that's the right answer, maybe she does take it right when she can at 62, if she waits, there's a big gap of time that her investments are going to have to backfill her spending. That could create extra stress, extra risk. So you see here on this diagram, if you look at this where I'm circling it right here, I mean, that's a long time of having to use investments to fill in the gap. So we have to be very careful about that. The next thing we're going to think about are healthcare costs, because those 4 years before Medicare can make or break an early retirement. It's not that it's not doable, it's just expensive. And market risk. What happens if she retires right into a downturn? So we have to stress test. And finally, spending flexibility. Can she spend a little more when she's younger and healthier? And there's another wrinkle here, though. Susan will only retire if she feels she could travel a little bit in the first 5 years, so the pressure is on. And I'm still troubled by one aspect of her future.
the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the spending capacity. What the system is doing is it's taking all the information I put in, all her assets, the pension, the Social Security assumptions, her age, and what have you, and it tries to come up with a reasonable number that we're able to spend. So in this case, in the first run of this, where I have her retiring at 61, it says that she can spend $5,950 gross per month for the rest of her life. Now, I want to draw a critical distinction about spending. When, as you age, you spend less money. You've probably seen it with your parents and seen it with others. As you age, you start to spend less money as you get a little bit older. The fly in the ointment, or whatever that expression is that if you get a cognitive illness near the end of your life, that's very expensive. That's what long-term care insurance is for, really, to protect against that. So in this scenario, the spending number increases with inflation, but it's not decreasing over time based on this end of life kind of phenomenon where people spend less money as long as they don't get a cognitive, very expensive illness like my dad got and my in-laws and what have you. So the system's going to give us this 5950 number. If I come here to test the plan, what I want to know is what is the chance of an adjustment from that spending number? You've probably heard of Monte Carlo analysis. Monte Carlo analysis talks about whether or not you're going to run out of money. I don't find that to be particularly useful because I think if people are going to run out of money, they're going to start spending less or need some government assistance or something along those lines. I think that it's more important for us to determine what is the likelihood that we can stay on our spending number. And in this case, it's 76% of the scenarios that we're running are above the plan. So that's actually a pretty good thing. There's still something that troubles me, which I'll get to about this case, the spending and Susan and that. But for now, we're at 76%. Now, I want to draw your attention to something. I'm going to go into another analysis where I have her taking Social Security at 67. And I'm going to run this and see. And you can see still 76% of the scenarios are above plan. There is really not a lot of difference if she takes Social Security at 67 versus 62. I know that she's going to get more money at 67, of course. But the reality is that if she doesn't get the Social Security, she's going to have to fill that income gap. And that has its own level of risk. So in this case, where she's getting the money in from Social Security, whether it's a 62 or 67, it doesn't make a big difference in her overall plan.
So Susan wants to retire at 61. I think she can do it at that 5950 gross number, which should get her about 5 grand, which is what she needs roughly. And then there's health insurance in there. But it's really tight. I mean, it is tight in my view. So let's look what happens if she keeps working just a little bit longer.
For this example, we're going to talk about Susan retiring at 62 and still taking Social Security at 67. Again, I don't think the Social Security claiming date has a lot of effect on her ability to retire when she wants. So when we have her work an extra year, you can see we picked up almost $500 of additional spending per month. It is very significant what happens when you work at least even just 1 year longer, right? That is 1 year less of retirement expenses that need to be met. So in this case, what we were able to do is to let her assets grow, save a little bit of money into her 401k, and now she's at 64.26. Once again, we're at 76% scenarios above plan because in the default settings, what we're suggesting, we want a much better chance of being able to increase our monthly spend. We want a very small chance of having to decrease it. So they're all going to say 76% unless I change some of the variables. I want to look at one more scenario. So the one I just showed you suggests that Susan retires at 62 and takes Social Security at 67. In the last one, what I'd like to suggest here is that Susan retires at 62, takes Social Security at 67, but works part-time for a couple of years. So let me show you what I did here. I went into this other income and I said, what if she were to make $4,000 a month doing whatever as ordinary income for a period of 62 to 65? What if we just did that? What does it do to our spending? So now we're at 7143. We're significantly higher, almost more than $1,000 a month higher than we were if she were just to walk out the door at 61 with no additional savings in 401k or any incidental income from consulting or whatever kinds of things she could pick up. I'm way more comfortable with this. And some of this has to do with what is nagging me about this case.
Here's what I want to say. I've seen situations like this a lot when there are people who make a lot of money on a yearly basis and fall into a certain style or standard of living. It doesn't mean it has to be opulence or anything like that, but they fall into a certain style or standard of comfort in their living arrangements. And for whatever reason, right? So Susan happens to be divorced, and divorces are hard and expensive, as some of you probably know. For whatever reason, her savings level and her age at 61, it's a little bit short for the way that she wants to spend money. This can be difficult to hear, it can be difficult to convey, it can be difficult to see when somebody's in that situation. That's why we saw these other scenarios where she had a little more comfort, a little more wiggle room. Those scenarios are much more likely to end up being successful for her.
I want to cover one more thing with you, and that's the retirement stress test. I mentioned it earlier when I said that one of the biggest questions on her mind is what if she retires into some kind of big market decline? It's a great question, and it could be very, very detrimental to her future. And so, what I do is I take the spending example that we've talked about just now, where she's able to spend a little more. She would have to work till 62, maybe pick up some part time work. I think that would be best for her. But what I want to know is what happens if she retires or at least gives up her full time job into a market event like the one we had in 2007, 2008, 2009. Look, we can look at the dot-com crash. We can look at the Great Depression. I like to look at the last just really brutal decline we had, which was 2007 to 2009. And I want to know how would her investment mix work out if that were to happen again early in retirement. So, what I want you to pay attention to is the green and the pink. The green, as the blue line, which is her asset balances, moves towards it, would indicate that she could spend a little more money. The pink would be that her investment balances became so low that she had to spend a little bit less money. You can see that there's one really hairy period right here where it just touches the pink right down in here. It's just touching the pink. Now, I would say that it'd be malpractice if Susan were to be set up in such a way that would make this a possibility. The reality is that she should have a year or two of spending expenses, certainly if she's not going to collect Social Security, set aside in investments that do not have market risk. Because you could see here that once we get past here, in one of the worst declines in recent memory, this blue line is doing quite well. It even brushes up against the green, which means that she would have the potential for spending a little more money in retirement rather than less money. So this is what the stress test looks like. I want it to be in the middle. I want it to be in the middle. I understand that it's going to hit right here, maybe 7,000 or 7,000 plus is not quite the number. Maybe it's $6,700 a month, something along those lines. But we do want to be here in between the green and the pink when it comes to a stress test.
So let's step back for a second. If Susan retires at 61, she gets her freedom now, but takes on market and health care risk. If she waits until 62, 63, she may find more balance, fewer unknowns, better odds, and a smarter bridge to the future. If she waits till 65, she enters retirement from a position of great strength. The decision isn't about what a spreadsheet says, it's about what matters most to her. Does she value freedom and peace of mind now or absolute security later? Because the truth is the numbers can work out either way, but only one plan will feel just right. If you're watching, if there are other assumptions or scenarios you'd like me to run in a future video, make sure to drop them in the comments. I love digging into this stuff probably more than a healthy person should. And if you found Susan's story helpful, subscribe, turn on your notifications. If you like this video, you might like this other one about the timing of retirement. And thanks for watching.